Welcome, everyone, to Indications and Warnings with Chuck Farrer, co-produced by Alan Brewer. Chuck and I are recording this show on March 14, 2025. It is day 1,115 of Russia's full-scale genocidal invasion of Ukraine. Today, Chuck and I are going to begin in Kursk and give a quick summary of what has occurred there. We don't have an accompanying map for Kursk, but we don't really need one. And I'd like to begin by reassuring everyone that Donald Trump repeating Kremlin propaganda that there are thousands of Ukrainian troops encircled inside Kursk Oblast does not appear to be true. Ukraine appears to have evacuated all or most of the Ukrainian force that has been in Kursk since last August. Is that what you hear, Chuck?
Yeah, that's essentially the position. Ukraine was holding on to about 400 square kilometers of Russian territory. That has been reduced by somewhere two-thirds, a little bit more than two-thirds. Three-fifths, I guess. Ukraine is still in control of a swath of borderland that is about 4 or 5 kilometers deep, and that is to the west of Sudza and south. The big takeaways from the Kursk development is essentially this: nothing is harder to do in the military than break contact with your enemy, right? Convince him to stop trying to kill you while you up stakes and move, right? That's a lot of ifs are lined up there. One of the things that Ukraine did, they had a tactical set of operations planned before they went in, something civilians would call an exit strategy. They were very good about controlling and maintaining ground lines of communication, which work both ways. That's how you advance, and they always look forward to this will be how we retreat on that day. They have, for the most part, in fact, in largest part, broken contact and retreated in good order. But I would like to say this retrograde maneuver never would have happened unless the absolutely unprecedented and unexpected occurred, which was the Commander-in-Chief of the United States unplugging vital intelligence support from an ally engaged in combat with a superior enemy. That's why the Kursk salient is where it is right now. And it still is. There are still Ukrainian troops occupying Russian territory. Situation tactically has slipped a little bit. There are Russian forces occupying to the west of the Ukrainian salient. There are Russian troops occupying a slice of Ukrainian territory. And let me also point out, if you are General Gerasimov and you need something good to happen, it's much easier for you and your North Koreans to invade an empty section of Ukraine than it is to kick the Ukrainians out of what they're holding on to in Kursk. Let me it's a lot easier to take over the playground where the bully isn't than to fight the bully. So again, this happened because of Washington, not because of any failure in Ukrainian arms, but Washington.
By turning off the intelligence, Trump essentially blinded Ukrainians everywhere on the zero line, but in particular in Kursk. And that is where the effect was first seen and where it was felt the hardest. Now, there have been tragedies in Kursk. We know that at least 5 Ukrainian soldiers were murdered in cold blood on the battlefield after being taken captive. This has been verified as a policy of Vladimir Putin. He has said that all Ukrainian soldiers inside Kursk will be treated as terrorists, and that means they would be executed by Russian soldiers.
Yeah, We have a concurrent development in Finland where a Russian special forces officer was taken into custody. He's just been given life in a Finnish prison for his hand in the cold-blooded murder of 22 Ukrainian prisoners of war. So this is not some payback. This is not soldiers getting out of control. This is a policy that Russia has. You don't get to execute prisoners of war. You have a duty of care. You know, we are the only people in the West who talk about the Geneva Convention, right? Russian officers and NCOs, they don't know what the Geneva Convention is. They don't have mandatory training in the rules of warfare, right? There are lots of things you don't get to do, like steal people's toilets. You know, it's ludicrous, but you don't get to loot people's homes. You don't get to rape women. You don't get to shoot at civilian cars. You don't get to launch cruise missiles into apartment buildings. All of these things are violations of the rules of war. All of them per force or war crimes. And it's sickening to see this happening. And we're discussing this right now. We're going to place this in how do we look in the broader picture? What are we looking at the negotiations, right? I just want to, we'll remind everybody just where the opposing parties are in this. I'm not willing to call it negotiations. You were talking previously in the show. I don't think we're at the word negotiations just yet.
I don't think we are either. We only know how Putin is going to use Kursk, for example, to confront both Trump and Zelensky when talks continue. But one final question about Kursk, Chuck. Did the Kursk incursion benefit Ukraine as they thought it would when they crossed the border into Kursk 6 months ago?
It would have.
Okay.
It would have. Had they been able to hold on to this territory, and they still hold some Russian territory now, it would have been a bargaining chip. They had every reason to think that they could hold on to it. And I'm happy to tell everybody that Alan and I have been saying, you know, I saw them as able to hold on to this territory until the summer.
Mm-hmm.
There is one thing that no one expected: the United States to arbitrarily pull the plug on Ukrainian battlefield intelligence. Who could have counted on that? It's not like your cable box going out, okay? It isn't like your power going out. And we talked about this. During this intelligence blackout, there are American servicemen and women and people in the intelligence community. The data was passing their desks. They saw what the North Koreans were doing. They overheard what the Russians were planning. They saw where the troop concentrations were. They knew the attacks were coming, and they had been ordered to withhold this information. Who could have imagined that? Right? Things are different in Washington now.
It's unforgivable.
It is.
It led to Ukrainian soldiers' deaths in Kursk. It led to an unnecessary retreat. Remember, Ukraine really did have everything it needed to remain in Kursk. They had built winter quarters. They had deployed engineering corps in Ukraine. And before the intel was turned off, although Russia had reclaimed some of the Ukrainian held territory, Ukraine had actually once again started to expand the salient inside Kursk. That stopped only after the intel had been turned off by Washington.
Right. And it wasn't just that the Kursk salient became no longer tenable. Look, this intel blackout also enabled several of the largest night barrages that Russia has undertaken against Ukraine.
Yeah.
And to put too fine a point on it, and I want to put this point on it, The decision that was made in Washington resulted directly in the needless deaths of Ukrainian civilians, right? If Russia fires 100 cruise missiles, 98 of them are aimed at apartment buildings. And that goes down to their mortar strikes. It's farmhouses, it's villages, it's crossroads. They want to rip the guts out of the Ukrainian people. They think that's going to break their will to fight. They are executing Ukrainian prisoners of war, declaring that every Ukrainian on Russian territory is a terrorist. Imagine that coming from the Kremlin. Imagine what would be going on in Putin's raisin-sized brain if Ukraine responded. Every Russian soldier on Ukrainian territory is a terrorist and will be executed. That isn't going to happen, folks, because Ukraine is on the side of the angels, right? We don't shoot prisoners. And it's in Ukraine's longer term and strategic interest to do that. You want to surrender as a Russian soldier, put your hands up and walk forward. You got 3 hots and a cot, okay? You'll live. You'll get through this war. That's what you want. You don't want to do what Russia has done to Ukraine, meaning Ukrainian soldiers fight to the death, because why surrender? You're going to get shot. Why surrender?
Yeah. It's a terrible realization for any Ukrainian soldier on the zero line to come to that. Frankly, it's just going to be terrifying to be fighting that way.
It is, and I every now and then I like to dip, the listeners' ears in the sort of baptismal font of battle reality. The majority of these Ukrainian prisoners fall into the hands of Russian captors because they can no longer resist. They're wounded. They're stunned. They can't. They're utterly helpless. And they're shot out of hand like dogs at the side of the road. That's the enemy. That's the enemy, right? So, and again, you just broaden this out. What would an occupied Ukraine look like with these sorts of troops, right? So it's an existential fight for Ukraine. And we're going to see it through.
I hope we see it through. We know that intel has been turned back on, and that will make a difference for Ukrainian forces on the zero line everywhere. We know that military supply has been resumed, but we don't actually know precisely what that means. For example, I have read that Ukraine has run out of ATACMS missiles. We don't know if additional ATACMS are going to be part of the American supply to Ukraine. Even though the supply has been turned back on, we don't exactly know what that supply is made up of.
Yeah, I would suspect that ATACMS were always a very precious commodity. And slight modifications to HIMARS launchers enables them to deploy ATACMS. They're much more capable, longer range, heavier hitting surface-to-surface missile. In the course of this back and forth, Washington has been able to pretty much at gunpoint force Ukraine into a willingness for negotiations. And they've done that in an extremely unprecedented, heavy-handed manner. And General Kellogg, Lieutenant General Kellogg, who I consider to be the adult leadership of the American negotiation team, described unplugging the intelligence as hitting a mule in the face with a 2x4. And that raised a lot of eyebrows. It might not have been perhaps the most diplomatic metaphor, but it really was to show those who were listening that it was completely unnecessary to do that, right? You don't have to hit an animal in the face with a piece of lumber. But that's what was done to the Ukrainians and the Ukrainian people, right? Blinding them for 10 days, 14 days or so, showing them that they are dependent on American intelligence as if the whole world didn't know that already. Uh, and then to find if this is a negotiation and it's a tennis match, it's not yet. Alan and I both agree on that. What did the Russians do? Well, they responded that they weren't interested in any kind of ceasefire until 2026. And they announced that they're going to shoot every Ukrainian that they find in the Kursk salient. Anyone want to say we're in a negotiation yet? Anybody? Yeah. Bueller? Anybody? No.
That's not negotiating. I mean, I would put it this way, Chuck. There have been contacts. The American and Russian delegations have been in contact, face-to-face meetings in Saudi Arabia. Trump and Putin have apparently talked on the telephone. Trump continues to be optimistic about Putin's eventual response to this ceasefire. We know that American and Ukrainian delegations have been more talkative. So I would regard America and Ukraine in more than just contact. There have been pretty substantive discussions. I don't like the direction they're going. I don't like to hear from the National Security Advisor, Waltz. I don't like to hear from Donald Trump. I don't like to hear from Mark Rutte, the Secretary General of NATO itself, that Ukraine's membership in NATO is totally off the table. And that's pretty much where Waltz and Trump have put that security guarantee, not on the table, but in the trash.
Well, the future peace and prosperity of Ukraine rests on its ability to defend itself. So were I Ukrainian, I would have thought that I had an object lesson in the capriciousness of my American ally. I've never heard of the United States ever doing anything like this, not in a kinetic shooting war. I don't get it. If the United States wants to move the needle with Russia, they have moved the needle with Ukraine by means fair and foul. They have moved the needle in Ukraine. There are a lot of people in Washington who think that this is going to be a real estate deal, that you can bring two opposing parties together, and that President Trump thinks he knows Vladimir Putin. I know him. We've talked on the phone. You think you know an unknowable cipher of a human being. You don't know him. You don't know that he is capable of beating someone to death in an interrogation room. You don't know that. Yeah, you're tough and you don't pay your contractors. That's great. You don't know this guy. You don't know him. He shoots down airplanes with his enemies in them. He's killed or had thousands of people killed and disappeared and thrown into prison. You don't know him, pal. He understands one thing, though, and I understand it even if the president doesn't, and that is the language of violence. He understands that completely.
Well, Putin understands both the domestic Russian stage. He performs differently on that stage than he does on the world stage, which he also understands. And I think that Putin, as a KGB agent and as Russia's president for roughly the last 25 years now, he has a set of risks he's willing to take on the world stage. He actually doesn't care what the world thinks of him. I don't think that Putin cares what Donald Trump thinks of him or the nation of Russia.
No, and to try to understand the Russian mindset, Trump grew up getting everything he ever wanted in his life, got a pony every Christmas, born on third base, convinced he hit a triple. That's his life. Putin came up in the slums of St. Petersburg with a drunk alcoholic father, scrambled his way up to law school, got noticed by the KGB, got picked up, got sent to Germany, where he was responsible for running little environmental organizations like the Baader-Meinhof Gang and the Red Brigades and the Brigade Roses, who terrorized Europe during the 80s and 90s. I had a part in chasing those people down. Those wires all crossed in Leipzig, Germany, where he was stationed. Okay, Trump can't know this guy. He doesn't know him. He doesn't know that, Putin is the last Homo Sovieticus. He's grown up all of his life hating the guts out of the United States. The perennial enemy is what the KGB and the FSB call us. And, Trump's at the Hamptons and he's at wherever he is in Palm Beach, etc. Look, that isn't the way Putin came up. And he was a leg breaker, right? He was not a KGB general. He was a worker bee. He got his hands dirty. And he didn't have the same rule book that me and my SEAL team had, believe me.
So I actually wonder, Chuck, is Putin playing Trump?
You know what? I think that Trump thinks he's playing Putin, but he hasn't made any moves to play him yet. It's almost like this. This is marriage counseling. And what Trump has done is grabbed the wife by the hair and dragged her into the counseling room and kicked her a couple times and sat her down at the table. And then opened the door and said, "Husband, come on in here." That's what's happened so far. I think that Mr. Trump, he certainly made lots of money as a business guy by any means necessary, I guess. But I don't think he's grasped what motivates Putin, right? Putin doesn't care that he's lost 1 million men in a 72-hour operation. Putin doesn't care that he has driven his economy to the brink. He doesn't care that his army is approaching implosion. He doesn't care. What Putin doesn't want is to fall from grace, right? He doesn't want to lose power. He's been in it for 25 years. Putin does not see a future where he is not president because he'll be dead. So what Mr. Trump, in my estimation, needs to do something like this. Here's a no-cost option for the United States. Russia makes about $1 billion a day trading oil with its shadow fleet. Russia has no navy. Snap your fingers. You've got 8 SEAL teams. Take over every Russian shadow tanker everywhere at anchor or at sea around the world. Could we do that? You're goddamn right we could. You're goddamn right we could. Then you say to Mr. Putin, let's talk. Let's talk about your future economy. Look, that's just one service, one option right there. No risk. What's the Russian Navy going to do? Hunt us down with their aircraft carriers? It's not, see? Look, there's a reason why I'm not the national security advisor, folks, but I don't know. Just putting one on the table for you.
I'd love to see what the Russian response to that would be. It would be certainly better than what Trump has done so far with Putin, which is ask for nothing.
Ask for nothing. I think, look, and again, I don't want to justify any of these mystifying moves because I can't. Yeah. And I'm not in a position to. I don't want to. There is some part of me that would love to hope that all of this was to a purpose, right? Getting them, forcing them, doing whatever, these mystifying, counterproductive moves. And I'm not trying to justify them. But what has got to happen is some of this has got to start falling on the Russians. You can't talk to Lavrov. I wouldn't ask him to what time of day it was, right? You can't trust Putin. They've got to be compelled. They've got to see a future in this because they don't care that they lose 1,500, 2,000 people a day. They zero F's given. This is a war with a nation that is, what did Churchill call it? An enigma wrapped in a riddle. So he needs better advice.
Well, Trump does need better advice, and so do the negotiators on the American side. It seems to me that they have given away everything that they could possibly have negotiated. They say that they have discussed in detail the land that Ukraine will have to give up and the land that they can keep. Of course, NATO, not a possibility. According to Trump, it's never been a possibility. That's, I don't think, true. There are no security guarantees that have been discussed, to my knowledge, with Ukraine. In Trump's view, a minerals deal that would bring America mining contractors to Ukraine would be all the security Ukraine needs, because Russia's not going to attack American mining contractors. I think that is a pretty far-fetched idea right there.
If I was grading that paper in National Security 101 with Professor Farr, I'd just write, see me in my office. Okay.
Yeah. Rather than pinning an American flag on Trump's lapel, you could just pin a big F.
I would. I'd say maybe you ought to go consider sociology as a major.
But the other thing that bothers me is, as I say, I mean, I regard this as being at the contact stage. This is a prelude to negotiations. Too much has already been talked about what Ukraine might be asked to give up. But my real fear is that Trump is setting Ukraine up for an ambush. In other words, or a mugging on the way to real peace negotiations when they begin. When you consider everything that Putin has asked for, and when you consider everything that Trump has suggested Ukraine must be willing to trade, Ukraine has every right to say no way. And then Trump says, well, you convinced me you're interested in peace, and now I see you're not. So once again, intelligence gets turned off, military supply gets turned off. Are we going to see that replay?
The president will be in power for 4 years. This may not be a problem that is solvable in one term. And let's look ahead pessimistically. What do you think this treaty is worth to Russia, right? What's a treaty mean to Russia?
Well, nothing.
Nothing. We know what Russia thought about the SALT I and SALT II Strategic Arms Limitation Treaty, right? Remind people who may not know, we know what they thought of the biological warfare conventions in 1972. They violated them to the point where they were literally arming ICBMs with hyperbolic smallpox. I mean, they have violated every treaty they have ever been a party to. The only one they didn't violate was the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, which ripped up Poland. So, looking ahead, if a bad peace is made and a bad deal is set, I'm not sure that Ukraine really has to abide by it. And I'm not sure that a future president, man or woman, would be as unpredictable as this one. A permanent peace is predicated on Ukrainian security, and security means strength.
And security means strength, and it also means allies. And Ukraine is getting plenty of allies in Europe. I think enough allies to displace the United States, just as Europe is now on a path to rearm itself. Ukraine, with European allies, might not need the United States to keep on fighting and defending itself. I mean, Friedrich Merz, the incoming chancellor of Germany, has announced that Germany will provide Taurus missiles to Ukraine. I hasn't happened yet. Merz is not the chancellor yet, but when he's chancellor, it appears Taurus missiles will finally be on the way to Ukraine.
And that is a good thing. And again, folks, when I say these things, I don't want anyone to think that I am agreeing with anything that has happened heretofore, or especially the manner in which it has happened. This is like trying to find a Rolex watch in a cesspool. But I can say this. It looks like Europe has decided to move forward in its own defense. I'm not willing to hand that to the adroit moves that the United States has made. I think that they have come to that decision in extremis, realizing that that their ally at the arsenal of democracy that they have rightly depended on for the last 80 years has now gone psycho kitty on them. And they have got to look to their own defense. Look, that's good. That's laudable. I'm all for that. Should this have been the way that unfolded? No, absolutely not. Would a consensus be better, led by the United States? Yes, that would be good as well. Would membership in NATO be a safeguard to Ukrainian peace and prosperity? Absolutely. Why would you take that off the table when no one asked you to?
Yeah, I don't know. Trump is negotiating a deal, whatever deal he comes up with, and he may not actually reach a deal, frankly. But if he does, he's going to call it peace. Now, he probably would have been in a much stronger position to negotiate peace and make himself into a peacemaker if he had simply recited all the times that Russia broke the Minsk ceasefires, more than 20 after 200 rounds of negotiations with Ukraine. If he had recited all the treaties, as Chuck relates, that Russia has violated, including actually the Budapest memorandum, including the Soviet-Ukrainian Friendship Treaty. And then Trump could have said, who would negotiate with such a negotiating partner across the table, when you know that whatever piece of paper they sign, they will rip up, and they have done this throughout history. And then Trump might have an understanding that without real security, which comes from membership in NATO and membership in the EU, Ukraine will never be safe.
Yeah, and that's, again, I sort of look at this, and this is a rational look forward. Based on history, we can't expect the Russians to honor any treaty, any negotiation, any ceasefire. And remember, in the Budapest Memorandum and in the Minsk, they were guarantors of Ukraine's internal sovereignty and its existing borders, right? They were the godparents, right? And they went in and hit them anyway. So I look ahead to this. I am not sure right now that this is a problem that President Trump is going to solve. I don't see that. He may not be the person that is going to convince Vladimir Putin to keep his hands off Ukraine. And he's got 4 years to do it. Could I see this war going on for 4 more years? Yeah, I absolutely could. I absolutely could. Because we're at a point now where Russia has done pretty much all it can do, barring more intel unplugs. But the Russian army is flailing. They are Pharaoh's army, bogged down. And to take a line from a great book. So I don't know. I don't know.
It's quite possible Trump will, if he fails in his first attempt to negotiate a deal, he might lose interest in negotiating a deal, and that would be the most dangerous thing that could happen, because if he loses interest, if he feels the spotlight has moved someplace else on stage, and he's no longer in the spotlight, uh, he could turn off supply to Ukraine. He could continue this reset with Russia that means American and Russian embassies and consulates around the two countries are going to be restaffed. But this might leave Ukraine in the worst possible position.
I'm not sure that Washington now apprehends what's really going on here. Because in my mind, always, this hasn't just been about Ukraine, right? This is about Latvia. This is about Estonia. This is about Lithuania, and Moldova, Georgia, a lot of other places. The real solution to this is whatever. It's 5, 10, it's 5 days, it's 5 years, it's 15 years when Putin leaves the stage. That's the solution. I'm not saying regime change in Russia. I won't say that's a forlorn hope, but if there is to be a negotiated peace, it just has to be predicated on a strong Ukraine. That's it. It boggles the mind that Washington can approach this problem and say, well, you've invaded and you've taken these 4 or 5, you've taken Donetsk, Luhansk, and you've got Crimea and you annexed it. And, that's a good place for us to start. That isn't a good place to start. Let's go back to 2014 when all of this started, right? I don't get it. I also don't think Washington understands that, look, the Russian army isn't in good shape, right? They're using donkeys and golf carts, right? That's not optimal logistical functioning, right? They got guys on crutches going to the zero line. You don't do that because you've got plenty of guys back at the replacement depot. They're teetering. They're never going to win this war, right? We have to look at it that way. Come at this from a position of strength. Let's see what Ukraine does with 600 Taurus cruise missiles. Let's see what they do with that. That's the solution.
I can't wait to see what they do with the Taurus missiles. We have a couple of maps that will demonstrate in every aspect just how weak Russia has become at this point of the war. It's really a complete denial of what Putin is saying. Ukraine would benefit the most from a ceasefire because it would allow Ukraine to rest, to mobilize additional troops, etc. And this is why Putin has added conditions. He said that such a ceasefire might only be considered if Ukraine receives no new weapons, if it mobilizes no new troops during the ceasefire, conducts no additional training of troops already mobilized. In other words, such conditions that are so excessive and nonsensical, Ukraine would never agree to them. And frankly, the Americans should never ask Ukraine even to consider these conditions that Putin wants to impose on a ceasefire.
And none of those conditions would constrain Russian action, would they?
No.
Russia would be free to send 100,000 more troops into, and believe me, they would. They absolutely would. See, there's this brinksmanship that Putin's got a pair of twos, man. He's bluffing. He is bluffing, folks. And I mentioned that half in jest that, 8 SEAL teams globally taking down those tankers. Look, I know what I'm talking about, the capabilities of naval special warfare. That could happen in 72 hours. Every one of those tankers would be in control of the United States Navy. And then let's talk.
And the Russians might not even know those 8 tankers would be in control of the United States Navy because who's going to tell them, right?
Who's going to tell them? Well, that's the other thing. And would that be this unprecedented? No. These ships are going with unqualified crews. They don't have insurance. They don't take appropriate, they don't have environmental response capability on the ships. They're all sailing unlawfully, illegally. We've seen the nautical disasters, including the latest where a Russian crewed ship T-boned an American vessel that was at anchor.
Yeah.
Right? Full, all ahead flank, and hit it amidships.
Do you regard that as an act of war, Chuck?
You know what? The Spanish-American War started for less of a reason than that, didn't it?
Yeah, it did. The battleship Maine blowing up in Havana Harbor. And the Spanish didn't blow it up.
No, the Spanish didn't blow it up. It was an accident. Absolutely.
Yeah. So that will be an open question. Act of war. I mean, a big cargo ship, Russian captain, an American fuel tanker carrying jet fuel for American jets, as you say, at anchor. I don't know if it happened at night, happened in the fog. I don't know the timing of it, but there is something called radar.
There's something called radar, and then there's another thing you can do with a grease pencil. It's called MOBORD, and you just, whenever you have this thing that says constant bearing, decreasing range, it means you're going to collide. It's simple arithmetic, right? And it was absolutely deliberate, just like the Baltic cables, just like it, on and on. So there is certainly reason for it. So again, these are the kind of things that Washington has to use against Russia. Think of this economy, how it's holding. Imagine, just try to reverse this for a second. Imagine if Russia could seize every American tanker around the world in 72 hours. Well, they can't.
No.
We can. They can't. And folks, you don't think the SEALs practice for this? We get in a plane, we go to the middle of the Pacific Ocean, we jump out with these Miami Vice cigarette boats. They parachute down, we get in them, and we run down these ships at night. That's what we do for a living, right? It's called an underway. We hook it up. I won't tell you the time to take over the bridge, but it is, you wouldn't finish your cigarette, let me just tell you that. So it's something we're very good at.
Just back to Ukraine and the contact that has been made now between the United States, the Russians, and the talks that have been taking place between the Americans and the Ukrainians, much more so than between the Americans and the Russians. As you mentioned, what interests Putin and other Russian imperialists, the Baltics, Moldova, maybe even Poland, maybe Hungary, maybe Kazakhstan, to the east, of Russia. It's not part of Eastern Europe, obviously, but so all these countries will be threatened. Their security will be lessened if the United States doesn't approach these negotiations with open eyes and with the ability to be forceful with Russia, actually force Russia to make concessions. No concessions have been requested of Russia. So my question to you, Chuck, as an American and a former SEAL, do you feel safer in America with a commander-in-chief named Donald Trump?
I don't think, I was talking to my wife yesterday. She was a Canadian. And I said, and Alan, you and I are of an age. I've never seen executive power used in this manner in my entire life.
No.
And I've seen what? I don't know. I didn't see the Korean War, but I saw Vietnam. I've seen every war since then. I've never seen anything like this. And I don't mind being wrong. Okay. I will happily eat my hat if all of this works out to a good purpose. But right now, I just don't see that. I see Ukrainian battlefield reversals. I see needless suffering of the Ukrainian people during these missile barrages. And, let's remember what that meant for Ukrainian defenders. They didn't know the Russian bombers were in the air. They didn't know that swarms of cruise missiles were coming. They didn't know the point of origin. They didn't know the vector of attack. They didn't know anything. They had to put fighters up and in air defense mode, meaning these fighters are up using their little radars looking for incoming threats. What good did that do? Hey, remember, we're the United States and we can cut your cable whenever we want to. What good did that do? Yeah. Seriously. What frightens me, though, Alan, and we talked about this before during the previous administration, where there were different sorts of failures around the National Security Council. But here, I think one of the failures is who speaks truth. Before, they were hiding under a table in the Situation Room. Now, who speaks the truth? I wrote an op-ed for the Kyiv Post about the sidelining of General Kellogg. Look, he was the adult leadership. Okay, there's a guy who has been in wars, to the wars, and is a scholar, as all generals should be. And a man who knows what the Russians are capable of and what makes them tick. And hey, he's on the sidelines now. Ooh, not a good sign.
Who speaks the truth? The Ukrainians do, frankly. Zelensky does, because they know what is at stake. They know what they are fighting for and why they are fighting. Something that has led to their success on the zero line. We're going to take a look at a couple of maps where Ukraine is making dramatic advances. I call them dramatic. First in Toretsk, we'll take a look at the March 13 map. And since March 13, Ukraine has advanced even farther into the center of Toretsk. This is a spot on the zero line where Russian defense, because they're on the defensive now, is at risk of crumbling.
Yeah, there's been some good progress here in Toretsk, and we're going to talk about Pokrovsk here later. So if you're looking at the Toretsk map right now, Pokrovsk is in the lower left-hand corner. In this period here, this was the 13 March map. Notice there's only 3 battle icons. So this was and again, the contacts are cyclic. Russia pushes forward, then they take a day off or so and push forward. Ukraine has been able to take back this territory and is pressing eastward in the city. This is because, look, the Russian forces are approaching exhaustion here. This is one of the things I would love to get the National Security Council to realize. Look, the Russian army is exhausted. They are still losing. Every time they come into contact with Ukraine, they lose between 35 and 85% of the attacking force. Often they lose 100% of the vehicles. One of the reasons they lose 100% of the vehicles is 37% of them are abandoned by their crews. Look, that just isn't winning. And the fact that there are advances here, and you're looking at the 3 blue attack vector arrows, these gains are occurring some of them are in 3-dimensional urban battle spaces. And remember, if you got there first, if you're the Russians in a 3-dimensional battle space, you should have the advantage. So what is it that makes Russian troops fall back when they've got such strong territory to defend? That's, military operations in urban terrain, because they're sick of fighting, right? They're not good at it. Remember, they're still badly led. They're badly equipped. They've got the worst officer corps I could possibly imagine. Their logistics are so screwed up, they're literally using donkeys. Normally, that would be black propaganda. It wouldn't happen. I'd pull it out of my hat. Golf carts, donkeys, men on crutches. Okay, I think everyone knows where I'm going with this. But, again, the battle in some places, look, Russia advances here, Ukraine advances here. The big problem for me is that because Ukraine cannot depend on the reliable and unflinching support of the United States, it doesn't dare to take advantage of some tactical opportunities that present themselves, right? They can't commit to a big counteroffensive because I don't know where the next bullets, beans, and Band-Aids, I don't know where they're coming from, let alone my overhead reconnaissance.
I think I have seen reports today of Ukrainian troops on the outskirts of New York, and this is just to the south of Toretsk. As I said, making farther inroads into the city itself. This is very tough urban fighting into Toretsk, and when you look at the urban area between Toretsk and Horivka to the east, this probably isn't the place for the big Ukrainian advance, is it?
No, I wouldn't think so. But when we get down to Pokrovsk, we'll talk about this. Slightly different terrain there. In fact, the shoe's a bit on the other foot with Ukraine in Pokrovsk and Russia trying to get in. But the real problem here, it isn't a problem. What the Ukrainians are going to do, one of the reasons they hit the Kursk salient is, they put together, scrimped and saved, and got the equipment, the fuel, the ammunition, the men, the manpower, the logistics, and they said, okay, we can assault somewhere with this force. Where should we do it? Should we take back Bakhmut? Well, Bakhmut was already inane anyway. The Russians took it. It didn't mean anything. If we take it back, it won't mean anything. And they were able to look north and say, hey, let's take a bite out of Russia. Right. So one of the problems, the huge problem, and with Washington making itself not only unreliable, but utterly unpredictable, how could any Ukrainian battle planner say, look, give me the resources and let me take something back? Well, you just can't.
Yeah.
I've got to, it's better to hold the line than roll the dice needlessly and lose something. And that, you can't fight a war like that. Right. The United States has always been throttling this, right? Keeping Ukraine on not just the leash, but choking them out.
Yeah, and as you were saying, the Biden administration made a different kind of mistake or failed in a different way than the Trump administration is failing with Ukraine right now. And ultimately, we don't know, of course, if the Trump administration will fail as an ally of Ukraine. They have simply shown Ukraine and the world they might not be that most reliable ally Ukraine needs. But the United Kingdom and France and Germany, Italy, Poland, the Baltics, Sweden, Norway, Denmark, the Netherlands, they might very well be the reliable allies Ukraine needs in order to continue to fight to save its future and its safety. They might be the reliable allies Ukraine needs right now.
And I want them to be, and I hope that they'll be. But, as a realist, look, there's one superpower, and it's us.
Yeah.
So we could be the deciding factor. And I don't know why we don't look to that, right? The United States was enough to win the war in Europe, and not only that, then rebuild Europe.
Right.
So with that power comes great responsibility. And I'm not against using it for good. Let's use it for good, because the future peace and prosperity of all of Europe, it's being decided right now in Ukraine.
Yeah, and I think maybe the future peace and prosperity of the United States is being decided right now too, because I don't think we need to break alliances that have made us prosperous and safe for 80 years, and that's what the NATO alliance has given us. You know, Trump doesn't want to be on that team anymore, but I don't know what team he is on now. I don't know what team he wants to join, but I do know that the United States has never succeeded diplomatically on the international stage, has never won a war without an ally.
Absolutely. And the NATO alliance has been the bedrock of American foreign policy, the bedrock and bastion of American security. And, to sit there, look, Europe could have been contributing more. Absolutely. But did we really want militarization everywhere? Do you want that power to rest in, we talk about nuclear non-proliferation. Okay, just put that on the table. And then there's military proliferation. And it was in the best interest of the United States that nobody was really putting 20% of GDP into their military. It made the world a more stable place, even if it was a bipolar arrangement with two superpowers. And face it, look, Russia's no longer a superpower. As Senator McCain said, they're a gas station with nukes. And their nukes don't work, and their nuclear threats don't work. Mr. Jake Sullivan, who, by the way, lost his security clearance, and I would have personally taken it away from him myself. And the great thing is that means you're teaching at Cal State Northridge, right? You can't even contribute to national security ever again if you don't have a security clearance. But the problem is so different now. We went from one extreme to the absolute other, like whipsawed.
Yep, it is. I mean, it's a complete whipsaw, and that actually is one of the problems. You can't have that kind of extreme movement in foreign policy or policies of all kinds in the United States. I mean, yes, the pendulum swings back and forth, but at this rate, the pendulum is going to fall off and the clock is going to be broken.
There is another way to look at this too, if you are President Zelensky. And I say this to give hope to people who, overthink this a bit. So the United States had a relationship with Ukraine, and it was that we're supporting you. We might not give you everything you need, but we're supporting you. And all of a sudden, we pull the plug on your intel. And we force you to do something you didn't really want to do, but now you're saying, okay, we're open to negotiations with Russia. Okay. You think Zelensky's really going to sign anything that is going to doom his nation? No, he might not. He might even sign it and then not do anything that's going to doom his nation, because peace on paper is not peace on the ground. And the closest times I ever came to being killed was during ceasefires, right? Because they would pass like daydreams. They meant nothing. And sitting here now, we don't know what's going to happen in the next 4 or 5 months, but I guarantee you, if there is any sort of ceasefire, Russia will violate it. I promise you that. I promise you they're going to violate it.
Yeah, there's no question about it.
Yeah. So what's that worth? I mean, so let's look ahead to this. In his first term of office, Trump said he's going to solve the Middle East. He's going to solve the peace problem. Okay, we got October 7th out of that. right?
Mm.
It got worse than it ever could have possibly been imagined. Okay, right now he said he's going to solve the Ukraine problem. And Alan, you chilled me to the bone earlier when you said, what if the spotlight moves somewhere else? And that just, whoa, he's going to seek the spotlight. He doesn't care what's off screen. He doesn't care what's backstage. He does not care.
That is exactly right. Wherever the spotlight moves on stage, that is where Trump goes.
Yeah, but you scared the hell out of me when you said that. We should have some signal, some button we could push back here and go. Yeah, because that one, wow, you're right. And it scared me.
I wanted to scare you with that other question. Do you feel safer now as an American with Donald Trump as commander in chief? And I can answer the question for myself. I do not.
Well, I took 200 words to say, yeah, me neither.
So,
yeah,
what is interesting, and if we move from Toretsk to Pokrovsk, in Toretsk, we see the Ukrainians entering this urban environment of Toretsk, entering a landscape where they might well have to fight door to door. This is what Russia thought they could do very easily in Pokrovsk to get into the city. And it's in Pokrovsk that Ukraine is having great success rolling back that Russian advance. There's not going to be door-to-door fighting in Pokrovsk.
No, it's again, and this was Pokrovsk was what Gerasimov et al. This was the prize when Avdiivka fell, which, by the way, took 12 years for them to take Avdiivka.
Yeah.
Again, mistakes were made. There was no Ukrainian defense in depth. And again, I don't know if I can call that a mistake. It was a resource issue, right? You want defense in depth, you need engineers, you need bulldozers, you need everything. And I'm not a military engineer, but I've seen them on TV. And look, it's a military occupational specialty, right? Yeah. Combat engineer is a job.
Yeah.
Ukraine didn't have the resources.
And the most famous ones are called Seabees, right?
Yeah, absolutely. The Seabees. I was with the Seabees in Beirut. So Pokrovsk was the object of all of this fighting, and the Russians just can't get there. And we'll be coming out with a map after we wrap. I'll get this map up, folks.
Today, so you all viewing will be looking at the 14 March map of Pokrovsk.
Right. We'll get that to you. And you can see that the Ukrainians have been effective in pushing the Russians south out of Pokrovsk. There is a little band of urban terrain that oriented east and west just south of Pokrovsk. And for weeks, the Russians have been right up outside those windows. Now they're pushed back at least a kilometer. And when you're looking at these maps, it's a good way for people to get a feel in terms of combat. About half a kilometer is what a good rifleman can shoot, right? So if a guy's shooting at you at 500 yards, he may not hit you, but he'll definitely get your attention if he's a decent marksman. And, the range of a heavy machine gun, of course, is much longer than that, but that gives you the battle distance of what an infantryman can do. Now, of course, the range of anti-tank guided missiles, that's a couple of kilometers. Various other weapon systems, the range of artillery, basically 22, 25 miles. Some systems have longer reach, some others. So what Russia wanted after Avdiivka was Pokrovsk, and you know what? They're not getting it, and I'm not sure they ever will, okay? Barring another internet blackout, to put it mildly. But this has been a triumph of Ukrainian arms. And Pokrovsk is going to be remembered, as a city that held, as Chasiv Yar will be remembered. This is going to be Ukrainian Gettysburg, folks. That's how important these battles are.
I hope Pokrovsk becomes exactly that, Chuck, the Ukrainian Gettysburg. I hope that what we are seeing is the high watermark of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. It will take months and months, if not years, to see if that's the fact, but it could well be. It just as we look at Pokrovsk, I think that we'll find Ukrainian forces are in contact in Shevchenko to the south of Pokrovsk. I think that Ukraine has thrown the Russians completely out of Kuduri to the west of Pokrovsk, which is again a pretty important place for Ukraine to have liberated because the Russians threatened to mass forces in Kuduri in order to launch attacks into Pokrovsk itself.
Right, and they have pushed them, pretty far south. That they were across the railroad tracks there. So this is these are good developments, and so the other thing to look at is, and I talk about this all the time, that Russia launching these platoon and company sized attacks, that's never going to be enough. They've always underdeployed. They put together force packages that are almost never have the capability to take the objective. And, to do that and carry out and do that again and again, it's just showing me that, look, there is no command bandwidth, right? There's no one saying, I gave you a battalion, and 6 weeks later it was gone. Every day, one platoon of the company fought, or sometimes a company fought, and then they came back. If they came back at all, they're hors de combat. Their vehicles are all gone. The men are shot to pieces. You don't feed them. You don't water them. You don't give them medical, and they're burning through that. Okay. That's so, that's crazy Uncle Chuck talking, but the proof here is in the pudding. You're looking at Pokrovsk. That's their goal. They need it. They want it, but they cannot carry out their own doctrine. Brigade task groups converging on a target. They're not doing it. Why? They've invented better tactics? No, they can't do it, folks. They can't do it anymore. They ain't got the jack.
I don't think there's anyone on the general staff who can invent a tactic of any kind at this point. So that also makes me wonder, Chuck. Yes, Ukraine is taking advantage of exhausted Russian forces. Yes, Ukraine is taking advantage of Russian difficulties logistically, unable to supply beans, bullets, and band-aids to the front line of Pokrovsk. But what is the makeup of the Ukrainian forces achieving these advances? Are they putting together equally small units as Russia and simply succeeding because the Russian soldiers are so exhausted?
It's a little of both. The Ukrainian soldiers are almost always outnumbered at the point of, what Ukraine is able to do when it has the intelligence is it doesn't have to be strong everywhere, but what it does have to do is converge and have force parity at the point of attack. They're almost never stronger at the point of attack, but they are concentrated sufficiently with appropriate weapons, FPV drones, mines that are, of course, laid earlier, but the Ukrainians have a bit of a dynamic capability to lay mines because they deliver them with drones, something that, didn't happen in my era. But it's intelligence that is the force multiplier. It's intelligence, timely tactical intelligence that allows Ukraine to do that. And then, after it's defeated that Russian assault, it can, deconcentrate, no longer making itself a target. But unless it can do that, it loses terrain, or it is compelled to fall back, as we saw in Kursk.
Yeah.
But, you take a Ukrainian soldier, he is better fed, better motivated, better trained, better commanded, with better unit cohesion than any of his adversaries. any of them, hands down. And that counts for something. It won't always win a war, but it counts for something.
It counts for a lot. And the demoralization of Russian troops counts for a lot too. We have seen Russian surrenders, especially here in Pokrovsk. I happen to think we'll see more of them in the coming week. I don't see the Ukrainian advance south of Pokrovsk slowing down or getting stalled by Russian counterattacks, but I don't know.
No, I agree with you. But so here's one of the situations that in a perfect world, a Ukrainian commander could get on a helicopter, go to Kyiv and say, "Hey, look, in my sector, the Russians they're spider webbed, right? They are weak. You give me 3 brigade task groups. Let me kick some ass. Let me drive south. Let me what's the highway here? Let me drive south down the M30.
Yeah.
I think I can get 50 kilometers out of this." Yeah. But what Kyiv's saying is, look, I can't spare you anything. I have to, my rainy day fund, I've got to cover the whole nation with this strategic reserve.
Yeah.
You may be right, but we can't risk it. And that's terrible because the Russians have to be driven out of the territory. Look, wars get won like this. You got an enemy standing there. You've got to cover him with fire or stab him with steel. That's it. And since the Peloponnesian Wars, it's still fire and steel. It's nothing else, right? Yeah. Nothing has changed in 3,000 years of recorded warfare. So there it is.
As much as Ukrainians want peace, and they do want peace, I think what Ukraine is doing in Pokrovsk and Toretsk is proving the lie of Putin's claim that the Ukrainians would benefit the most from a ceasefire. That it's the Ukrainians who most need the ceasefire. That's why they have agreed that they would accept a ceasefire on the same conditions that Russia would engage in a ceasefire with. But what Ukraine is doing in Pokrovsk and in Toretsk is proving it is the Russian army in Ukraine that would actually benefit the most from a ceasefire. They're the most exhausted. They are probably more likely of having logistical problems, feeding and supplying the troops on the zero line. And I bet there are Russian soldiers on the front right now, maybe even commanders crying into their beer or their vodka or their borscht or whatever is in front of them, saying, "God, Putin, take the deal, take the ceasefire. We need you to do that to save us."
And we talk about, and we've been doing this for almost 4 years now, 3 years, 3.5 years. That perception is not reality, right? And Alan and I remember Soviet times where they would tell you that up is down and night is day. That was the starting point of their information warfare. Yep. And here we have it exactly again. Look, Ukraine needs this ceasefire. It's Ukraine that's lost 1 million people in 3 years. It's Ukraine that has fought its army to a standstill. It's Ukraine's economy that is teetering on the brink, which it isn't, right? Ukraine this year will produce fully 1/3 of its own military needs. That's industrial power. That's capitalization. Those are jobs. It's Russia that is killing a generation of its young men, right? Their casualties are above 1 million. I used to say they were 700,000. They're 1 million. 750,000 grievously wounded human beings who can no longer work or care for themselves, and 350,000 dead. That's almost all the dead in the American Civil War.
Yeah. And this number of 1 million, I mean, this is a new estimate, and it's supportable. The accepted number is almost a million. It's equally unbelievable as of today on Ragnar Gudmonsson's dashboard. After 1,410 additional casualties of Russian and North Korean troops on March 14, the total casualties have exceeded 891,000 at this point. So, whatever figure you want to accept, they are both stunning, staggering losses that Putin has suffered. And the other thing that Ragnar follows every single day, and I do think anybody who wants to get a handle on the tempo of this war needs to look at Ragnar's dashboard every single year or every single day throughout the year. But he tracks the number of engagements, and sometimes they are well over 200, over 220. But Russian attacks have been pretty consistently dropping. Today, 146 engagements, again, primarily around Pokrovsk and Toretsk and also in Kursk. But Russia cannot keep up the number of attacks. What does that tell you about the Russian forces?
Well, it's telling me donkeys and golf carts, right? There is a benefit to being on defense. So Ukrainian soldier, as it waits every morning for the Russians to show up, and they do, obligingly, for the most part, almost invariably in the middle of the morning, right? So we've talked about this. You literally get out there with your binoculars and you see the dust trails in the, out on the horizon, and you go, here they come. The drones converge, the reconnaissance drones converge, the FPVs converge, the heavy lift drones go out there and drop anti-tank mines, and game on. But it is the Russians that have to pay the freight, right? The Ukrainians aren't burning gas. They do concentrate their forces, but it's the Russians that are coming, and they keep demonstrating. Alan, and you and I have watched this war, daily.
Yeah.
We look at almost every engagement that we can possibly find.
Yeah.
And we see the same things over and over. It isn't sweeping success. And we don't see anything that the Soviet army made its reputation on, or the Russian army is utterly incapable of carrying out. And that is large-scale coordinated ground maneuver warfare. They can't do it. 250 points of contact all along the zero line. It's not a coordinated attack, right? Even in Pokrovsk, on this map that will come up, you'll see the widely spaced attacks. Concentrate at the point of attack. Make a wedge and drive forward, right? Hey, look, that's what I learned.
Well, when you look at the maps, that's actually exactly what Ukraine is doing in Toretsk. It appears this will be exactly what Ukraine will be doing south of Pokrovsk. There are also Ukrainian forces, to the west of Shevchenko, as you see, to the west of the T-0515 highway. Ukraine has something up its sleeve south of Pokrovsk here.
Yep. There's the M30. But again, it's heartbreaking because, we don't talk about this much, but look, I publish things I see on the map. There's a lot of things I don't publish that I see on the maps. I see positions on the zero line that I don't want to discuss in public, but to our Russian listening guests, I see badly deployed troops. I see gaps in the line. I see places where there are no roads. I'm seeing good places to stick a couple of brigades of advancing Ukrainian forces. Russia can't be strong everywhere. And look, when we are literally talking donkeys and golf carts, we're not talking about the kind of logistical apparatus that can keep up with with a dynamic battle situation, right? And Alan, we talked about this 2 years ago when Russia was running out of bodies to throw into Bakhmut, and everyone who was in a transportation battalion got yanked out of their vehicles and sent to the front.
Yeah.
And I said, hey, logistics are a military occupational specialty. You can't get a couple of knuckle-dragging Marines to provide a battalion, right? That's something you go to school for.
Right. It is. And we will talk more about that. I happen to think in the next few weeks, because the Russians will have tremendous logistical problems in Pokrovsk, especially. Yeah. We briefly mentioned Chasiv Yar, Chuck. Again, Ukraine advancing in Chasiv Yar, pushing the Russian forces out of those neighborhoods, in the northern neighborhoods of Chasiv Yar. So pretty much wherever you look on the zero line, except Kursk, that's a special case. Wherever you look, it's Ukraine that is advancing. And again, in Tourette's Pokrovsk, what's so interesting about these two areas is it's Ukrainian attacks that are coming, and I would love to see that punch in the nose south of Pokrovsk that sends the Russian forces reeling. Maybe we will, but as you say, Ukraine can't rely on its most needed ally at the moment, and the Europeans who have come to Ukraine's defense can't supply Ukraine with the same number of things that the Americans can.
Yeah. If there's any good to come of this, it is that, but I'm not willing to credit Washington with this, because the manner by which this occurred is not the way to want to conduct business. But we're seeing movement out of Germany. I did a little piece yesterday, and it'll be up eventually, about the Taurus missile system. Great piece of gear. It is Storm Shadow on steroids, stealth capable, very long range, has a really incredible warhead that can go through a building and detonate on the floor you want it to detonate at. It's good against deeply hardened and buried targets. Is it a war winner? Not by itself, but would it strike terror into Russian logisticians everywhere? Absolutely. Absolutely. And a couple of hundred of them in Ukrainian service, that's important. But this is what it's going to take to bring Russia to the bargaining table. And again, it's probably a mug's game. So and people don't buy into the whole Russian thing, because keep this little feather in your hat. Whatever is negotiated here, the Russians aren't going to abide by it. It's not going to be fixed in stone. They're simply not going to do it. Until their strategic aims change, they're not going to do it. And they have sunk so much into Ukraine, including Putin's pride. This was his idea. Until there's a change in leadership at the top, or until Putin realizes that he has a very bad problem on his hands, sees tankers all over the world, this is going to be a game. He's going to say that Ukraine desperately needs this. Oh, the humanity. Don't buy it. Russia is skating at the thin end of the pond.
It is, and I think we're gonna, we'll see that more and more. There are some apparently new sanctions coming from the European Union. As these contacts between American, Russian, and Ukrainian negotiators build up in intensity. We'll see if negotiations actually do get underway. It's not going to be a 24-hour deal. It will take months, to me, months and months and months to figure out. But Chuck and I will be here watching those points of contact grow into more active talks. We'll cover again in a future show. We talked about it a couple of shows ago of the demands that Putin is making, completely unacceptable. If you listen to Putin's demands, it actually makes you think more and more we must give Ukraine everything it needs to continue to fight and to win the fight. It's the only way you can defeat an enemy like Putin and Russia, who would ask for so much. And what they cannot achieve on the battlefield, they want to achieve at the negotiating table. And that's why Ukraine needs everything to continue this fight.
Yeah, absolutely. And don't lose sight of this. I mean, remain cynical here, because think of the history of violated treaties. Think of the propensity for Russian war crimes. Think of what is at stake here. Think that the present administration, they got 4 years to figure this out. This war's been going on for 12. It may not be soluble in 4 years. And also, don't ever lose sight of the fact that Ukraine will only be secure and prosperous if it is strong. If it is strong. Russia has been at this for 12 years. So, and remember the information environment. And I don't want to sound like the John Birch Society, but I will say this: people don't even know who John Birch is anymore. But if the Russians say something, they're probably lying.
Yeah, they probably are. So be careful. But careful how you engage with Russian disinformation and Russian talking points. You actually have to take precautions that Donald Trump and many members of his administration are not taking. Trump doesn't have a bullshit filter. If he did, he wouldn't be repeating all these Kremlin talking points. So use your bullshit filter.
Yeah, absolutely. Just remember this: if you think Russia's winning, ask one of the donkeys how it's going. Okay, just see how
that would be the perfect Russian on the front line to ask, Chuck. One of the donkeys. That's the key to Russian logistics now in Pokrovsk. And Chuck and I will be going back to Pokrovsk and Toretsk and Chasiv Yar and Kursk, and probably taking a look at Velika Novosilka as well next week. But for March 14, 2025, this is the 1,115th day of Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine, full-scale genocidal invasion of Ukraine. This has been Indications and Warnings with Chuck Barra. Thank you, everyone. Slava Ukraini.
Heroim Slava. Thanks, everybody. Good night. We're going to see you again.